Yesterday we concluded Song of Solomon, which also wrapped up the weeks we've spent on what's known as the wisdom literature, the wisdom tradition in ancient Israel. And the wisdom tradition is one of three influences on the next section of the Bible that we'll be in now for a couple of months, and that is the prophets. In addition to the wise living influence of the wisdom tradition, the prophets were also influenced by what's known as the priestly tradition of ancient Israel, with the concern for the reality of sin and guilt and the urgency of cleanness and purification. And the prophets were also very influenced by the covenant with Moses and the commandments of God and how God's people were to live. So all three of those, the tradition of Moses and the commandments, the priestly tradition and wisdom tradition, contribute to the prophets. Now, a lot of times when people think of prophets, they think of them almost as predictors or prognosticators of the future, or even like fortune tellers. But as my professor of Hebrew Bible told us when I was in seminary, it's far better to think of the prophets as people who are forth-telling rather than foretelling. In other words, that the prophets are those who speak the hard truth that God is telling them to speak. And that hard truth is about the present and consequences for the future if people don't change how they're living. And the prophets as a group universally believe in God's good intentions for the well-being of God's people and God's desire for there to be peace and justice and righteousness and joy and a strong sense of community. But there are things that are getting in the way of that. And most often it is the sin and the lack of faithfulness and obedience and love and justice of the people. And so the prophets come, these extraordinary personalities, to generate energy and courage and faith and hope for people to be obedient to God. And the first of the prophets, and the longest, is the prophet Isaiah, one of the most significant books we have in the Hebrew Bible, one of the three Old Testament pillars on which the New Testament rests, along with Deuteronomy and Psalms. And Isaiah is a contemporary of other prophets we'll hear about later this winter, Amos, Hosea, and Micah. And in Isaiah chapter 6, if you look at verses 1 to 13, that's where you can read about the call of Isaiah. And it was in the year that King Uzziah died, who Isaiah was close to, that he has this extraordinary experience in the temple of seeing the Lord on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. He has this remarkable experience that causes him to realize he's a sinful man in the presence of a holy God. He says, "Woe is me, for I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the Lord of hosts." And God cleanses him, and then we get our verse of the day, which is Isaiah 6, verse 8. "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me." We're going to hear about what that call of Isaiah meant this coming week. And I encourage you to think about how God may be calling you. Where is God sending you in your life to represent God's desire for love and justice, faithfulness and joy?